Okay, so the three steps or phases that I go through to paint a portrait are: step one, I get an accurate drawing. Step two is I construct the form by blocking out the big shapes with thinner paint. And the last step is dialing in smaller shapes and subtle value relationships. So I'm going to break down each one of those steps in detail in this video. And if this is the first time you're seeing one of my videos, then welcome to Paint Coach. My name is Chris Fornatero, and I'm here to help simplify oil painting so that you can get better faster. Now, before I get into these steps, I'm just going to say I don't believe in formulaic painting. I don't believe in a set way of painting. I don't believe that you have to stick to a set way of painting. In all honesty, your process is going to always be evolving in time as you get better and learn new things. This is just how I go about doing it, and I felt that breaking it down into these three steps will help you better understand my process, and hopefully you can get some more value out of it to improve your own work. All right, for this painting in particular, I'm using a Frederick's Blue Label stretched canvas. It's just an acrylic primed canvas. I actually toned it with some cerulean blue. I find that cerulean blue is great for, lighter flesh tones. There's a lot of oranges and reds in there, and they contrast well with the light blue. I don't always do this. Sometimes I'll use burnt umber and ultramarine, sometimes burnt sienna. Just this one I decided to go blue. For this painting, I'm using ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, alizarin crimson, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and cadmium lemon. And if you've seen a lot of my videos, yes, I normally stick to the primaries and white. I'm adding a few colors here just to change it up. I've gotten people ask me, like, what colors do you use for a portrait when you're not making painting video tutorials? And this is pretty much the palette that I like to use. I add in the cerulean blue, the burnt sienna, and the yellow ochre. If you don't understand color that well and you want kind of a more in-depth look at that, I got a free shortcut to color mixing guide. I'll put a link to that in the description below. You can check that video out. I go over the color wheel, the primaries, complement colors, all that fun stuff. And my medium that I'm using in this is Liquid Original. All right, so step one, get an accurate drawing. Now notice how I said accurate, not detailed. I don't really necessarily like doing a detailed drawing. This is just me. I find it much easier to just block out the major shapes. I'm also getting measurements though. I recommend getting a proportional divider if you don't have one. It's a really helpful tool to get quick measurements. If you don't have one of those, you can always use a ruler, whatever you need to do to mark out where certain things are. Like I always like to get the top of the head, the bottom of the head, where the nose fall, where the eyes fall, where the mouth fall. And I block it out with thin paint. I don't like drawing it out super detailed because then you can fall into the trap of just like filling it in and kind of coloring inside the lines. Whereas I like to build my painting up as I go. Also highly recommend having your image, whether you're working from a hard copy image, a computer, iPad, or whatever, having it, as close to your canvas as possible. So it's very easy to look back and forth. That's the best way because you're going to be able to see the differences and be able to translate what you see onto the canvas a lot easier. Now I'm also painting in straight lines here. I'm not using curved lines. It's a lot easier to get a straight line accurate opposed to a curved line. And in this drawing stage, I'm really concerned about getting the right angles because that's going to help me get the right planes. I'm going to go into planes in just a minute. But thinking of the face as if it was carved out of wood or stone right now and it hasn't been sanded down is the best way to think about it. Now, drawing is so important. I always say that you can't practice your drawing enough. Always be practicing your drawing. And I get people asking me, do I need to practice drawing before I start oil painting? I always say no. You're going to learn to draw as you're oil painting. As you can see here, I'm having to draw in the face before I paint it. And even though I'm not going in there and drawing and shading and doing little things, I'm still practicing getting what I see onto a canvas, and I'm practicing, seeing a measurement and transferring that measurement over, whether it's eyeball or actually physically measuring it, and being able to see things like how far from the nose to the mouth, getting that space correct, and just seeing the correct shapes and angles. That's drawing, and the more practice you can get with that, the better your paintings are going to turn out. This is why I also say, tracing isn't bad, but you are losing out on an opportunity to practice drawing. Every single time you trace, that's an opportunity you could have practiced your drawing and gotten better. All right, step number two is constructing the form by blocking out big shapes with thinner paint. So here I'm squinting my eyes and I'm just trying to see light and shadow shapes. I'm being really loose here. I'm moving the paint opposed to applying the paint, which I'll get into later. At the beginning stage of the painting, I'm using thinner paint and I'm putting it on and I'm pushing it around and I'm moving it and I'm getting it to where I want. This doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to nail the exact right value and color right off the bat. You want to get as close as you can. The main thing is I want to get paint onto the canvas here so I can start making judgments and comparisons and assessing what I have so I can change it. I like to think of it as getting clay up onto the thing that sculptors put clay on, so I have something to actually carve and mold. If nothing's up there, I can't do anything. And when I'm doing the lights, I'm actually finding kind of the darkest light value that I can, because I want to have room to build lighter values on top of that, because I find it easier to lighten paint as I go opposed to darkening it. Now this photo in particular is very difficult because there's very few shadows. A lot of the face is operating in a very narrow value range. You know, other than under the nose and like in the eye sockets, most of this is just so evenly lit, and the change from dark and light is very subtle. But I'll get into how to handle that a little bit later. Now, once I have the light and the shadows mapped out, I want to start constructing the form of the face. Now, I like to think of this as still drawing in a way, because I'm still trying to find where things are. You know, where's the brow bone? Where's the bridge of the nose? Where's this cheekbone? Where's this plane? Where's that plane? So there's still that skill of transferring what you see in your reference to your canvas. And at this stage, things are going to be exaggerated. You know, the angles are going to be harsh. The shapes and the construction of the face is going to seem exaggerated with the darks and the lights, and that's fine. Like, that's what I want right now. Like, I want to exaggerate because I want everything to be clear, and as the painting goes on, I'll start sanding things down and fine-tuning and dialing everything in. But right now, like, I want everything to be very apparent. In this section, I'm really thinking about the planes of the face. So what are the planes of the face? Well, what are the planes of any object? You know, like a plane is whenever there's a change in direction on the surface of an object, that's going to create a different plane, which is actually going to catch light differently. And, you know, for sculptors, it's easy to wrap your mind around this because you're actually working in 3 dimensions. Whenever you change planes, you're actually going to change the direction at which you're carving and working. But as painters, we have to do this on a 2-dimensional surface. So we have to create this with light and dark paint. Just like I was drawing it out in straight lines, I'm also getting the planes in straight lines. I want it to be very clear the direction of the planes. And you can see how I'm holding my brush. I'm holding my brush kind of like a conductor of a symphony holds their wand, and I'm not afraid to move it around and pull and push and go left and right. I like to think of it like I'm carving it out. Like I am trying to think, you know, in the mind of a sculptor and trying to carve out the planes of the face here. So once I've carved out the structure and I feel like I've gotten the big shapes and the big structure where I want it, now it's time to move on to step 3, which is dial everything in with smaller shapes and more subtle value shifts. At this point, my paint is going to start getting a little thicker, and I'm going to start thinking about applying the paint opposed to moving it. Meaning before I was putting on loose paint and I was like kind of pushing it around, like, oh, let's spread it over here, let's push it up here. Whereas now I want to think of it as applying, like I'm laying down a sticker, I'm putting down a mark, and I want to leave it no matter how big or small that mark is. And there's a lot of thought going into my brush work here, and I always tell my students, think of your brush work as if it was paper mache and you're trying to wrap it around your subject. You know, don't just mindlessly put strokes in any direction. Use those strokes to better communicate the form of what you're painting. You know, don't be afraid to turn your brush any which way to get the stroke going in the direction that you want. This is also the stage where I'm going to start to dial in the features. And since we found the structure of the face and we're aware of drawing aspects while structuring the face, it's going to be clear where these things should go. Like, this is how you prevent yourself from putting an eye or a nose or something in the wrong place. Is kind of like once you develop, you know, like say if the eye, for example, like I've developed, you know, where the brow bone is, and then, you know, the cheekbone, and then the bridge of the nose. So it's kind of narrowing down the areas of where I can put the eye. I like to think of painting a portrait kind of like putting together a puzzle, and the more pieces of the puzzle you have, the easier it is to find the pieces that you're missing. So if you ever feel uncomfortable putting in like a certain area on a portrait, you know, get away from that area, work some other areas of the portrait. I always say work the portrait as a whole, never stick in one area too long. And sometimes just developing other areas will inform you on what to do on that area that you were having trouble with. Now with features, they each have their own, you know, specific structure and certain things going on. I've actually made a whole video on that where I demonstrate an eye, a nose, and a mouth. I'll put a link to that video right here. Extremely helpful for kind of understanding the structure of each one of those features. Now at this stage, I'm still thinking in planes, just a lot smaller planes. You know, the planes in which direction things are facing are dictating my brushwork, in which direction I lay down paint. Now another big thing that I'm doing here is I'm dialing in value relationships. I'm looking at different areas, you know, darks and lights compared to one another, And for this photo in particular, since the shifts in value were so subtle because it's such an evenly lit photo, the changes from dark to light are very subtle. So I feel like I spent most of the time with this painting, lightening my darks and darkening my lights and bringing them closer together. If I was painting a portrait from somebody in The Godfather, this wouldn't be as difficult of a thing to do. This even soft light is making the value transitions very subtle. And again, understanding the structure of the face is going to help you identify these value shifts a lot easier, since I know, the structure of the face, how the jaw works, how, the brow bone, the cheekbones, and all this stuff works. It's easier for me to identify and find where these value shifts are happening. And I'm also smoothing out, those harsh angles that I constructed at the beginning of the painting, and, any harsh value shifts wherever I have dark and light values, meeting, creating, a line or a harsh divide. I'm softening those not by blending, like I don't blend my paint. Instead, I lay down values that are in between. So say if I have a dark value and a light value, I want to find a value that's in between those to lay down in between them to soften that transition. Now at this stage, the adjusting can seem endless. I always say the last 10% of the painting takes 90% of the time. So towards the end of this painting, I was just going in there and comparing values and adjusting, dialing in those value relationships more and more. And actually, even after I thought I was finished and turned off the camera, I went back for another half hour or so and even dialed things in a little bit more. Sometimes it can be really difficult to, finish a painting. You just keep seeing things you want to change and change and change and change. You got to know when to put down the brush. So that's my process. Let's go over it one more time. Get an accurate drawing. Construct the form of the face by blocking in big shapes with thinner paint. And then lastly, dial in smaller shapes and subtle value shifts. Hope this video was helpful. Hopefully you gained some value out of it. Hopefully you can take some things away from it and utilize it in your own paintings. And when you do those paintings, if you post them on Instagram, tag me in them. I'd like to see your work. I'm on Instagram at Forza43. If you're just starting out on oil painting, if you're just starting out oil painting and you feel lost and you don't know where to start and what to practice on, you just really don't know what to do, I got a Foundations of Oil Painting course that will really help you out. It's pretty much the course that I wish I had when I first started oil painting. I'll go over materials, drawing, color. I walk you through a still life, a landscape, and a portrait. There's paint-alongs, lectures, tutorials, exercises. It's just a great thing to help somebody get going painting. I'll put a link to that below as well. Also down there, I'll put a link to my Patreon page where there's full painting video tutorials. All right, I'm Chris Fornatero here telling you to go get painting.